So hello and welcome to this presentation on a framework for embedding GCE or Global Citizenship Education in teacher education for adult and community education practitioners. My name is Mark Kearns and I'm the Research Officer for Saolta. Before I get into the presentation, I'm just going to have a quick overview of what Saolta is. So we're a small NGO based in Drogheda, County Louth. Saolta is the Development Education Strategic Partnership Consortium for the ACE or Adult and Community Education sector here in Ireland, comprising the partners here that you can see on the right hand side of the screen. So that includes INCTIS, Concern, Irish Rural Link, and also Maynooth University Department of Adult and Community Education. Our mission or strategic goal is increased accessibility and quality and effectiveness of GCE within the ACE or adult and community education sector. Just a note on abbreviations, I will be using the term GCE as a shortened abbreviation for Global Citizenship Education, and occasionally ACE to describe the adult and community education sector here in just a bit about the definitions and descriptions of GCE. I mean, there's many out there. I'm picking this one from the latest Irish Aid GCE strategy, which was published last year in 2021. So this emphasises a lifelong learning process, and as it says there, to increase public awareness and understanding of a rapidly interchanging world and unequal world in which we live. It continues by challenging stereotypes and encouraging independent thinking. GCE helps people to critically explore how global justice issues link with their everyday lives. You'll find some references to the idea of locality in the literature on this. In other words, linking global issues to our everyday lives here in Ireland. And the emphasis is also here, and you'll find this again throughout the literature on GCE, on acting and taking action to build a better world. So it's not just learning all about what GCE is and how those global issues affect our daily lives, but it's taking action on those issues. And if you want a very, very shortened abbreviation, my own kind of term for this and my own understanding of this is teaching and learning from a global perspective. In terms of the background for this, so there's a very, very strong policy framework for GCE here in Ireland, including the latest national strategy documents, but we've also had a more recent document from the Department of Education and Science. That's the ESD, or Education for Sustainable Development document. I'll say a little bit more about that as we go along. And again, in keeping with international policy perspectives and international policy documents, and specifically documents from UNESCO, this emphasizes once again a lifelong and life-wide cradle-to-grave approach to ensuring that all Irish and citizens are exposed to GCE. So it's reaching those groups who would not necessarily come within the span of the formal education system. So we're talking about formal, informal, as well as non-formal learning situations. And over to Albert there, who suggests that once you stop learning, you start dying. Just a little bit, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but I'm just going to talk a little bit more about how the development of GCE in Ireland. I mean, Irish Aid funds a lot of the projects here, including, for example, NICE and Ubuntu, which are specifically for embedding GCE in primary and secondary education, teacher education. So this framework is specifically designed for teacher educators as well as student teachers who are working in the adult and community education sector. So it's building on the platforms in primary and second levels and trying to reach as many adults as we can through teacher education with adult and community educators. Just briefly a bit about the adult and community education sector in Ireland. And as I suggest here, it is kind of a bit messy and it's not as neat as I'm presenting here. But basically this comprises of three subsectors. of adult education and learning. So we have adult education, which includes second chance education, for example, literacy and numeracy provision. We have the large further education and training sector, which is the largest subsector of adult education here in Ireland. So that includes vocational education and training and provision. But we also have smaller community-based or community work organisations who, as it suggests there, respond to local needs such as unemployment, crime and addiction. Just returning to the left-hand side of the screen here. So adult and community education comprises these three subsectors, and its definition includes all intentional learning activity in formal, informal, as well as non-formal education settings. And the sheer diversity of this sector includes, for example, social sciences, arts and humanities, as well as vocational training. So it's it's a smorgasbord of academically related, but also more vocational training based education provision. Also, just in terms of, just briefly in terms of scale, so within the second level system here in Ireland, we have 370,000 pupils in second level. So that's typically students who enter the system at age 11 and exit at 17 or 18. Whereas in the adult education sector, and I'm taking these figures from Solus, who oversee FET or further education training here in Ireland, they estimate in 2021, 302,000 learners aged 25 to 64 are involved in some form of intentional learning activity, whether that's in formal, non-formal or informal settings. But this at the same time excludes learners in the 18 to 24 age group who comprise 60,000 participants. So when you add that 60,000 onto 302,000, we get a parity here in terms of the numbers, the potential numbers of learners that we might be, that GCE might be, who might be exposed to GCE. So just talking about the actual research and the development of the framework itself, well, the research was guided by three questions. Why do we need a framework for embedding GCE and ACE? How is this achieved and with whom? What partners and what stakeholders are involved? And what does this look like in very, very practical terms? In terms of the data generation, in terms of building the framework, in terms of talking to providers, in terms of research, we did a scoping exercise or an audit with the eight providers who were involved specifically in teacher education training in this area. So we were looking at things like, I suppose, first of all, their interest or motivation to do this, but also their capacity size, their current understanding of global citizenship education, what it might require to start embedding GCE in curriculum and in teaching and learning in these programs. Interviews with other key stakeholders and decision makers. For example, we've opened up discussions with the QQI, the Qualifications Quality Authority here in Ireland, to look at embedding GCE in modules that are typically taught in the adult learning and training sector. And also there was an extended, we undertook an extended literature review on the matter to see how this fits within the broader literature and research on embedding GCE in ITE programs. To give you an idea of the outputs that went into the development of the framework, and the framework itself is a position paper, and these are all 2021 documents, a review of policy and practice developments in the area of GCE and ITE, including the challenges, but also what works and best practice in this area, and also finally the framework document, which sets out the phased introduction of GCE and ITE programs for those working in the adult and community education sector. And all of those documents are available through our website and online to download and to peruse. So just briefly, the key findings in terms of those research questions set at the beginning of the development of the framework. So why? So first of all, embedding GCE and ITE, and I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, this will allow for significant scaling of activity in this area, and for for us to reach a broader range of learners across the lifespan, including those kind of what are typically termed hard to reach or, I suppose, easy to ignore groups. Secondly, this is a partnership approach, and ties in with I suppose, the spirit of the SDGs and SDG 17 partnership of the goals. But also, this also is emphasised quite strongly in the literature on the matter in terms of building a more sustainable framework for embedding GCE in the sector. But also, perhaps this framework needed to be different and more adaptable and more flexible to meet the needs of providers working in this area, which is different from the formal schooling provision here in Ireland at primary and secondary, because we're talking about tutors and educators working on a vast range of vocational and non-vocational programs in hugely diverse settings with very, very diverse student groups. So this needed to be flexible, adaptable in meeting the needs of practitioners working in this. In terms of the strategy outlined in the framework, well, this focuses on four areas for strategic focus. Again, a whole system partnership approach involving teacher education providers, NGOs, statutory and non-statutory bodies, as well as the students. Secondly, building capacity for teacher educators and student teachers. So building their capacity to embed this in their own particular teaching and side of practice so that they can adapt it to whatever context they're working in. Thirdly, research and development, that the framework is underpinned by continual research and development to capture what's happening on the ground and disseminate this in terms of good or best practice. And fourthly, policy and practice, influencing and impacting on policy and practice in this area. So in terms of the actual approach, there's four guiding themes, and I'm just taking out selected bits here of the framework. And again, this is available in far more detail on our website and online, and I'll give you the link to this at the end. First of all, and again, emphasizing the need for a flexible and adaptable framework that would be, easy for providers working in again a diverse range of areas and context to meet their individual needs. Meaningful in terms of a critical and transformative approach to global citizenship education, and avoiding kind of many of the token approaches that to be found in this area. Authentic in terms of that is relevant to the teacher educators themselves, but also and the student teachers, as well as the students that they're working with in their own teaching and side of practice. Again, the context for adult community education changes rapidly across the three subsectors that I mentioned earlier. So community education provision is different in nature and what it looks like compared to, say, ETB provision, although there will be a lot of transfer. And finally, sustainable, again, that GCE will become a permanent feature of ITE provision and indeed the student experience. So we've put in place 4 discrete phases for this to happen between 2022 and 2027. In phase 1, there'll be an range of interventions, including workshops for staff and students. In the second phase, we'd start looking at teacher education curricula and modules and how we can embed GCE in those. The third phase we've termed consolidation and review, and this is where we bring together the research to inform future practice. And fourthly, the final phase in 2026-27 would be a transition phase, which the framework would be handed over to an independent organisation along the lines of the DICE project and the Ubuntu project, which are interventions in ITE in the primary and second level respectively. So far we've been active. So the framework is to all intents and purposes being implemented. We're in the very nascent or beginning of this. So we've done 2 workshops with universities with 38 teachers, trainee teachers in attendance, as well as student teachers. And just to give you maybe a flavour of what's come out of those workshops and information sessions with student teachers, I mean, this case study focused on a student who is teaching English as a second language um, I mean, the population, the profile, the demographic profile of people entering further education in Ireland has changed rapidly over the last 10 years. So we have a lot of refugees and asylum seekers for whom further education is their first entry point as adults into the education system here. And as it suggests, they're a stepping stone to life, work, and study here in Ireland. So Catherine plans to embed GCE in her practice through, first of all, exploring students' own stories, but also through practical projects that will allow them to develop or practice work-based language skills, as well as exploring, you know, issues of sustainability, global justice, and so forth. So Catherine has planned for her students to set up a pop-up shop in the college, and this pop-up shop will retail recycled clothing, but also at the same time highlighting the plight of those children who are involved, the child labourers who are involved, who work under poor conditions and who are involved in this so-called fast fashion industry. This idea of buying a garment for €5 or €6, wearing it once and then discarding it. So that's one of the practical results of one of the practical workshops that we've done, and we've received a very positive response from both teacher educators and student teachers. And there's a long way to go with this, but we believe that the framework that we set out here is one that's workable for this sector, and ultimately workable for the providers of ITE and for the student teachers themselves. You can find out more. You can find all of the documents mentioned here in this presentation at our on our website at developmentperspectives.ie/Saolta research. Thank you for your time and interest in the presentation and in the framework, and a specific mention for the Jean, who are the Global Education Network Europe, for supporting our research and for the development of this framework document. Thank you.